that was one of the favorites coming into the season. That's Trevor Lawrence. Jacksonville Jaguars facing the Colts. You're a history buff. Colts in Jacksonville, not great.
Yes, they have won 8 straight games at home against the Colts. And this is talking about a team that, in those early stretch of games was not a very good football team. Now they are a very good football team, and I think they're starting to get into gear a little bit, starting to move the ball. We saw Christian Kirk have a good game. We saw Calvin Ridley get involved. I think beginning of the season, they were really trying to get Calvin Ridley going. He had like a 2-year hiatus, so it's understandable. But Travis Etienne having a decent game. Trevor moving the ball relatively well. Wasn't the greatest game from Trevor Lawrence, but ultimately it's their defense getting the takeaways. Gardner Minshew had kind of a rough game, 3 interceptions. The running game kind of muffled a little bit, which I think is the Colts' DNA to this point, is just Zach Moss and then eventually Jonathan Taylor getting involved. And when the run game isn't going for them, they just don't have enough weapons around them to really open the game up. And we saw that in this game. Gardner Minshew, love the guy, love the mustache, but just wasn't his game.
Yeah, it wasn't Gardner Minshew's game, and like some of those picks were definitely his fault. Like when he forced it, he threw it in like a crowd of 4 guys and just threw it up there. And then one thing I'll give Gardner Minshew credit for is he's fine standing in the pocket and taking those hits, kind of Carson Wentz-esque, where he doesn't really mind, but sometimes like it definitely comes back to hurt him, where I get you're fine standing in the pocket, and it's great that you have that strong pocket presence where you're fine stepping up and getting blasted. But at the same time, that seems like what hurts Gardner Minshew, where he doesn't necessarily have the awareness of when players are coming around him. The amount of times I see Gardner Minshew just standing in the pocket and then a guy coming around blindside, I'm like, okay, this one's going to be a fumble. And I feel like that's really the knock on Gardner Minshew, where the awareness isn't really that high. The competition, the competitiveness you can't deny, but just that awareness attribute just seems like there's something lacking there with Gardner Minshew. And then 3 interceptions. I don't know if it's the Colts in Jacksonville, because we saw Carson Wentz have a similar game in Jacksonville where it seemed like everything went wrong, but it seemed like this was his first game where he really started to fall apart for the Colts, and you really saw a hole in the Colts offense. Early in the game, though, defense was pretty good. They kept them in the game as long as they could, but with the turnovers, you just couldn't come back from that. And then the Jags offense, on those turnovers, I want to see them all year. Seemed like they would just be kind of stagnant, settling for a lot of field goals. But Travis Etienne, well, he only had 58 yards. That run he did have where he did the fake handoff to Tank Bisbee, that was sick. Like, that was an awesome run by Travis Etienne. So the explosiveness is there now. Their offensive line is starting to get better, and then they're finding a little bit more of an identity on offense where they're starting to convert those drives in the red zones. They're not settling for field goals every single time, and then their defense and their offense is finally playing complementary football, and then you're just not seeing that sloppiness. It seemed like the Jags had a tough time really getting motivated to get into it this season. They're like, okay, we got to the playoffs and won a game, we're focused on something bigger, but they're just lethargic and sloppy early on, where it was tight end fumble here, Trevor Lawrence interception there, running back fumble here, where it's like, it seemed like there was something that would go wrong each drive. And then the Jags really just needed to clean up a mistake here, and then that would translate to them blowing teams out by, 17 points and then starting to get over that 30-point mark week in and week out. And it seems like that offense is taking that step forward, has been more buttoned up, and the run game has been more impressive, where we need Travis Etienne with 100 yards, we need Calvin Ridley with 100 yards, and we need Trevor Lawrence pushing a buck 350 most games. And with Trevor in this game, it's like, yeah, he had 182 yards, but did he need a throw for 300? No, he didn't. No. And that's the thing where it's like people don't realize how good this Jags team is. And it seemed like their problem on offense earlier was, okay, we have Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. We need to keep them happy. Now we have Calvin Ridley, Tank Bisbee, and Travis Etienne. So like it can be hard figuring out how all of those pieces fit together, and chemistry can take a little bit of time to build. So it's like we started last year, but we need to re-identify ourselves with Calvin Ridley and what that looks like so we can be more explosive in the future for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're starting to pull it together. And this is the time last year where they started to really come into their own. You already knocked off the Bills, so if playoff seeding comes into effect, you have that win here. So let's see what they do against some of the other better teams in the NFL now.